Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Trading Brains Podcast. We're here for episode 18. Um, we're going to talk today about recruitment, and more specifically, recruitment for like the top tech companies, companies like Facebook, Twitter, Netflix, Uber, Amazon, Google, all those companies. And we actually have a guest on today who has requested to remain anonymous, and so for the sake of the podcast, we're going to call him George. And he's a recruitment specialist. He has a lot of knowledge in that area, and we've just got a few questions for him to explore. Some of the issues that people in recruitment deal with when recruiting people for these tech companies, and also maybe people who are trying to get into these companies might have some insight from these questions. So, George, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's get started. What is recruitment in general, and what are their different types of recruitment, if there are?
So recruitment is basically a process with the first step being contact between either the interested person or candidate in this case, or from a headhunter to a potential candidate. And then going through the process to the end where eventually an offer is given for a specific job or position inside of a company. So there's different types of recruitment. It could be, again, like I mentioned, headhunting. People can apply directly to positions. There's people who like to refer their friends, have friends in high places, can help you get into different roles, things like that. So really recruitment is a process, and it's really what you make it.
Okay, well, that's a great entry point. And we've got a lot more specific questions going forward. And as a recruiter at one of these companies, are you handling the entire recruitment process, or are there people for specific layers of the recruiting process?
I think it depends on the company. I know in a couple of different companies, they usually break it down into a couple of different teams where you'll have people who are headhunting, being in one kind of specific team. Then you'll have people who, after candidates will pass an initial stage in the process, will be transferred over to a recruiter who will basically handle scheduling things like interviews. And then when they're getting ready to extend an offer, the recruiter will be kind of prepping that offer and telling the candidate what things like compensation will be. And then doing that kind of negotiation with the candidate and the company when it comes to the finance teams too.
So would you say that at the beginning of the process, on the recruiter side, you're kind of more getting a feel for what the candidate is looking for, just to ensure that maybe whatever roles you have in possession match kind of their career trajectory or what they're looking for?
If they apply online?
Yeah, or if they reach out directly.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you can expect to have like a specific amount of roles open based on what different managers on different teams want. So let's say their team is growing and they need people from a specific area. Let's say you're talking about like marketing. You might want somebody on social media marketing who's really good at that. And you have a spot open. And when you're talking with the candidate and they say something like, well, my weak point is social media marketing, in that case, then you wouldn't really be moving forward with that person. But
right.
If they kind of mention like, yeah, I'm really into social media marketing, I have a couple of like certifications, things like that. In that case, that would be a match, and then you would kind of move forward with the candidate in that sense.
Yeah, well, I guess for record of excellence or work in the field of social media, I had no idea that there were certifications, but I would assume that working in a public-facing capacity for like a corporate organization, like I know a lot of companies like Burger King or Wendy's have really hilarious social media profiles, and whoever's behind those are great.
Yeah.
They had to interact with the customers and try to make them laugh, and then that banter between those three big fast food chains, that's actually really funny. People are actually really interested in that banter between the three when they meet each other.
As long as it's not completely hostile, I think a lot of people can just be exposed to the brands themselves a little more, and they'll be more likely to think about that product, or if they see it in passing, they may decide to purchase something from that organization.
George. So I have a quick question about, so like with the process, like when people like try to reach out to you like in LinkedIn, or like what do you rather have, like be like direct message on LinkedIn, be like, hey, I'm kind of interested in this field, like in, let's just say, engineering, and or like just to apply online, you deal with X amount of numbers. Like if someone, basically the question I'm trying to get at, it's if someone messages you on LinkedIn and say, I'm interested in that, like would you actually start helping them out trying to find a job within, or like do you wait until you get to work?
So I think it depends really on what that person's background is. Let's say they have a really, really relevant background to a position I'm hiring for, and I haven't already found them, which is pretty rare. In that case, yeah, I would begin to work with them to open an application. I mean, when you work at a really big company like that, you get a lot of messages on LinkedIn from really, really random people in like different countries, recruiters from everywhere. I try to respond to everybody who's interested in a role saying, oh, sorry, that's not open, or you should talk to this person. I can't always get to everyone, but I would prefer that, if someone's interested in a specific position, that they apply online. There's usually a pretty big myth about a lot of big tech companies where, there's thousands of people applying per day for a certain role. There's no way that they can actually look at all of those resumes. But actually, we do look at all of the resumes. It's true. Even the ones that are just like random pictures of people. It's not really like a resume, but we still have to screen through everything that comes in.
Right.
How many resumes do you go through a day?
I think it depends on the role that you are covering. I know people who will go through maybe like 5 per day, and then I know people who will go through 500 per day.
Wow. That's just a big
500 per day. Wow.
Yeah.
So if you divide that by like how many hours of the day you have, plus maybe meetings, that's not much time for each resume. I mean, granted, looking at a resume shouldn't take longer than maybe even 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, it's like when you get used to it, you kind of know where to look on the resumes. Like if you're hiring for, let's say a software engineer, but somebody has some background in, electrical engineering, chances are it might not be such a big match. It could be a match depending on what they're actually working on now. But that would be, one specific indicator where I would say, well, maybe I don't necessarily need to spend so much time looking at this resume and going through it. I can just kind of skim their work experience. And if it doesn't match, then just reject.
Right. Well, because you could tell, like even say you were a novice recruiter and you looked at that application and then you let it go through and then they were a failed applicant, right? You could just know from the experience that you had, okay, this applicant, the likelihood of their failure is XYZ in your head.
Yeah, it's subconsciously calculated, pretty much.
Right.
Okay. I'm just thinking about like just more in the fact of like what do you look for in a resume, like for like, but let's just say like that software engineer, like what do you normally like look for at a resume to make them go to the next round?
Yeah, is it like just skills or like what skills they use on a specific project and what they actually like?
Or it's like hit the keywords to match the description of the job?
Yeah. So when I am recruiting for software engineers, number one thing I'll look for is their education, and not like what school they went to, more did they study computer science in university? Generally, for a lot of these big tech companies, you need to have a pretty solid, base or for the foundational knowledge of computer science. And that's things that you learn in school and not really on the job. So that's one area I'll look for. I'll also look to see if they've worked for any big companies or competitors that I know of. If they work there, then I know generally I don't need to spend so much time like helping them to prep for interviews, for example, because I'm confident that they'll just pass the interview regardless. But yeah, I mean, just really relevant experience and background in education.
Okay. But like not like keywords in it. Like if someone tried to match like the responsibilities and the job duty onto the like on the resume, like do you actually look for that, or is it just more like do you have the skills, you have the experience, and you have the education, and that's it, and you're on to the next.
So I think for a lot of smaller companies, recruiters will spend time to see if people will like change their resume to match with the job description. I don't know the words in our job description. I just know the necessary skills that the managers want. So let's say somebody is going to work on a project that requires, JavaScript. Let's say it's like a front end project. If someone has, front end engineer, if I see JavaScript a lot in their resume or anything with like .js at the end, generally I'll be like, okay, well, this person might be a pretty viable candidate for the role. So the keywords really are, if it matches the skills that I'm looking for, then yeah, I'll usually at least reach out for a phone call.
Okay.
All right.
Have you have any more? You have any questions or what you?
Yeah. So I was gonna ask. So you just mentioned that you don't know exactly what the applicants are seeing on maybe the job sheet, right? So you don't really know if they're changing their resume to match the job sheet. In general, in practice, would you suggest to applicants, not even just to big tech companies, but in general when job hunting, that they tailor the resume to kind of have certain keywords included? So if they have relevant experience that can match what's on the job sheet, that they should?
I don't. I think sometimes people go really overboard with, and I used to be like this, like where you pretty much just copy paste the job description in your resume in like different places. You break it up and really try to match and tailor it. I don't think you need to do that. I think usually jobs will kind of like towards the bottom of the job description will have certain requirements. It might be like a minimum requirement or like a preferred qualification or something like that.
Right.
If you can incorporate those into your resume, that's what's going to stand out the most. Because the recruiter isn't going to be like, oh, wow, this person really, really tried hard and matched their resume to our job description. I'm looking to see if you have the skills or not. And if you don't, then it's going to be rejected. If you do and you incorporate those qualifications onto your resume, then that's going to be, almost a guaranteed phone call for me.
Right. Well, okay. So at the end of the day, the resume is something that is just getting you into the process.
Yeah.
Just like, hey, if your career path or your experience has absolutely no relevance to this, then what's the point?
Right.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for that answer. George, what is the ratio of, the total applicants that you see maybe in a month, right? Or maybe a longer time period, maybe half a year, to successful applicants? And of course, I know you can't give specific numbers, so just a ballpark. Be great.
Sure. Well, I think it also, depends on the job. When you have a job that really relies on something like soft skills, it's pretty difficult to know if that person's going to be able to perform well if we're talking about something like sales.
Or client management.
Yeah, where it's like you really, really need the communication skills. So someone might look good on paper, and then you bring them in, and they have zero communication skills, and that's going to be a failed applicant. Whereas something that requires hard skills, let's say we're talking like mobile app development, where maybe if they're working on like an Android-based project, they might need to know like Java or Kotlin. If I know and I see on the resume that they've been working on that for like a long time, I can be pretty sure that they'll perform well. And generally when they go in the interviews, even if they fail, the interviewer will be like, well, they weren't awful. They weren't bad. Like they knew what they were doing, but they just didn't hit that level. And I guess to give like a percentage, I mean, and it drops really because interviews will get gradually more difficult, later in the process. So when we talk about that first interview, And I think it also does depend on the recruiter too, and how much experience you have. But we could say, you might see like 30% of people roughly for like an average role get through that first interview. And then when you start getting into those later interviews, that drops down to somewhere between like 5 to 10%. And then for successful people who will accept that role, it's anywhere between, I would say, 3 to 5% of people that we come in contact to, regardless of how we come in contact. That's headhunting or online applications or anything like that.
All right.
Uh, so
the answer.
yeah, no, for like George, for like a lot of these like larger companies, like American companies that work outside of America, like does those department like operate in English, or like do they operate in other languages, or like do like the different departments operate in their own certain way, like kind of like, or English, half Japanese, half English, half Italian, or whatever language that they are based at.
Yeah, I mean, as everybody knows, I'm living in Japan now, and that's how we're doing the podcast. And George here is also stationed in Japan, so he can speak on that.
Yes. And it's actually a really, really interesting question, and I'll try not to give like a ridiculously long-winded answer. But I think it depends on the department, really. If you have a lot of locals in that department, you'll hear like a pretty interesting mix of like Japanglish. And I would say for departments where they have to operate in the local language, so let's say you're doing like sales or marketing, in Japan, you're going to be doing that in Japanese. So generally, that department is going to be full of native speakers, and they're not just going to, speak English to each other all day. So those departments will operate almost entirely in the local language. And it's interesting because when you go to other offices too, I've been to some like in Asia and Europe. You'll notice that depending on the office you go to, some will be more local heavy and some will be more international heavy. So even in offices like outside of China, I've heard a lot of departments just full of like Chinese speakers, and it's pretty interesting to not expect that, and then you kind of go there and you're like, huh, interesting. I wasn't expecting to hear all of this this international language, but yeah, definitely it can be pretty global depending on the department. But usually you can expect that most departments will operate in English. Yeah.
So would you say the department affects the language that they operate in more so than locale?
Yeah, 100%. I think so. And yeah, I mean, even if you work in a department that's super local, still all of that internal documentation and all of that will all be in English. Things like conferences will all be in English.
Right.
It's just kind of the daily grind when people are chatting with each other is when it turns into that local language.
Right. They gotta find some way to, operate in their native tongue. Right. I know how that feels, and you do too, I'm sure, or have in the past.
For like the applicants like apply like for a job that's remotely, like do they need to know the different language on, like, let's just say like someone like operates in New York but like remotely at home, and they have a lot of conference calls in Japan, but like they're talking to, let's just say like talking to you, George, and you speak English, but do they have to know another language to get on with the conferences, or like it will be something different that everyone would know?
Well, I think it's interesting because, I mean, the short answer to the question is yes. But I think that for the jobs that require, full-on hard skills, you'll notice that they're a lot more lenient on that English language requirement because they're really just looking for the skills. People can pick up English after a certain amount of exposure to it. Any language is the same, really. But, regardless of if they're good at English or not, they're still going to need to be at a level where they need to be able to communicate in these conferences. And when you look at things like sales, or when you look at things like marketing, if everybody in that conference is going to be a native speaker of a certain language, then they'll just do it in that language, but all the documentation at the end of the day will need to be done in English.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, I mean that makes sense. I have kind of a software engineering background. I worked as a software engineer for 2 years, and I quickly realized that just because I know English and because I can read documentation that describes what's going on in the technology doesn't actually give me that much of a leg up. Even though a lot of my fellow Japanese engineers thought so, doesn't give me much of a leg up in terms of understanding how the tech works, because that's a whole other language in and of itself. And I would speak to other Japanese engineers at the time, and we'd be talking about the tech in Japanese, and he would say, he would point at it and be like this, and then he'd point at it on the documentation. I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it now. But like he didn't need to say it. It was just a software engineer speaking to another software engineer gets how it works. So I understand that. This kind of leads into another question with the whole language thing. Are there positions located in Japan that don't require any Japanese or use both, or what sort of positions require more Japanese, and then what sort of positions don't really need it? I mean, I guess you kind of covered it with software engineering.
Yeah, I mean, when we hire for sales, again, it's going to require native level Japanese, just because, for the customers you're interacting with, not all of them are going to be really big international corporations. Sometimes they're going to be small businesses. So you would need to know that local language really well, and especially with Japanese, like all the honorifics, that's really, really necessary. But then for roles like, let's say, a software engineer, we don't have any language requirement for English or Japanese. It's just, can you do the job? And if the answer is yes, and you can at least get through the interviews in English, then it doesn't really matter what language you speak or where you're coming from. Really, we'll still be able to give you that job.
Right, because then the tech company can go from there, kind of letting them grow into experiencing language, and if they already have the technical prowess, then that's really what is the base. That's
exactly. Yeah.
Like for like when people apply like for like the engineering job, like do you guys send like the engineer like to business trip, international like conferences like throughout like the year, like or like the fiscal year, or is it more like they just stay at the location that they are hired at and that's it, or they have their local meetings?
So it depends on the team that you're on, but most teams will have some kind of international cooperation with offices, whether that's going to be somewhere else in Asia or in the US or Europe. So yeah, definitely there's international travel. How often they travel depends on the needs for the team. Sometimes they'll travel for work. Sometimes they'll get to travel on company funds just to do like team building and have fun with their counterparts in other countries. So yeah, definitely there's travel. I would say maybe a few times per year. Yeah.
Okay. So like I'm just going to go off just another route. Is just when you said soft skills and hard skills, right? Like those are, I'm guessing, two separate entities of skill sets that companies are looking for to hire. Let's just say for a software engineer, like what kind of skills, what kind of soft skills and what kind of hard skills does the applicant needs to be successful into the interview process or applying for a job in like software engineer?
Okay. So for software engineering, when it comes to soft skills, it's not something that we put a huge priority on, but we definitely would look at that. And I would say the number one skill is communication, because software engineering job isn't a job that you take on solo. It's going to be within a team of people, whether your team size is going to be 3 or 20. So definitely we check communication. If people are able to properly kind of explain that thought process when they're coming up with some kind of solution, or if they're able to really communicate with their team to let people know what kind of route they plan on taking in the project, that's going to be really important. And then we also look at whether or not people are ethical. And we can do that by asking certain hypothetical questions and putting people into hypothetical situations to see what they might do in that situation. So let's say you're on a project with 2 other team members. The deadline's next week. You've completed 90% of your work. Teammate 2 or teammate A, let's say, has completed 80% of their work. And then teammate B has completed, let's say, 30% of their work. What would you do in this situation? And would you prioritize hitting that deadline or helping out your teammate? And there's really not a correct answer for that kind of situation. But what we would really look for is to see how would you solve that problem, or would you really kind of just shy away from that and kind of sweep things under the rug? And then those are really the soft skills we would be looking at. And then hard skills, really, it does depend on the position. Let's go back to like mobile app development for an engineer. If it's going to be for something like Android, I would look mainly at if you, 1, have a background in computer science, or 2, do you have a background in mobile development? Have you been using Java? Have you been using Kotlin? It's really just whatever matches to the job description at that time for hard skills.
Yeah, I mean, no matter what, if you have the hard skills, you can be an engineer. But to be a really great engineer, I imagine you, like you said, you need the communication ability to coordinate with the team. And I myself now, I'm not working as an engineer, but I have to be constantly liaising with the engineering team and make sure that I'm communicating, what is going on my end, what I'm doing to the software engineering team, and they're always, writing about what they're doing on Slack. So sometimes it's difficult to keep everything visible. But once everybody's on that level of mutual trust, everything runs so much more smoothly in terms of the engineering side working with the business side.
I'm just thinking because like I want to hit this because I know a lot of people care about the dollar sign or yen or whatever country they're at.
Yen mark.
Like I know the standard living of life like in America or the Bay, or let's just say New York or Bay Area is probably going to be a lot different than Tokyo or Singapore or Beijing. Like how does the big tech companies do compensate for different markets around the world?
Yeah, and this is an area that we tend to struggle with quite a bit in Tokyo. It's, of course, we're looking at the market, we're looking at the average pay, we're looking at average costs of rent. And I'm not, on the compensation team, so I can't give like a super detailed answer. But when I talk with candidates about this, it's something that we have to explain, especially because we do a lot of our headhunting from Silicon Valley. And people there are living pretty lofty lives. They're making, $500,000 per year. And when they come to Tokyo, let's say you're making $300,000 a year in the Bay Area as a software engineer, and we hire you to come to Tokyo as a software engineer through our company. You're not going to be making $300,000. It's likely you could expect to see that nearly split in half coming over to Tokyo. But the way that you spend money, kind of the lifestyle that you live, wouldn't necessarily change because some things are cheaper here. So it's just kind of a shock for a lot of people to see that dip. But then you just have to really explain,
why
we adjust your salary based on the location. So if in the future you transferred to New York, or if you want to go back to the Bay Area and you transfer there, we'll readjust your salary to match that, and then you'd be back at your 300,000.
Or whatever is appropriate for.
Right, yeah, but generally we always offer competitive and above average for sure.
Okay. You did say something about one that leads up to the next question about transfers. So it's like how often does that happen? Like from one person in your department that wants to be transferred from Tokyo, let's just say, to another country or back in the U.S. and like does that happen more in in the engineering side or or other fields? Like what's more common for these transfers to happen?
Okay, yeah. So I can break that down into two answers, and I'll answer the latter half first about who transfers more often. So you can expect that engineers are going to be transferring more because they're running on those hard skills. And if they match with what a hiring manager anywhere else wants, then usually they can just transfer there. Uh, but when you have somebody, let's say you want to transfer to like a sales position in, I don't know, like Italy or Poland or something, you're going to need to speak Italian or Polish at a native level to do that. So it depends really if you can match all of those requirements. And then to go on to the second part of the question, yeah, definitely a lot of these companies will put a really, really heavy emphasis on the ability to transfer internally. There's two types of recruiters. There's the external and the internal recruiters. And internal recruiters focus on filling jobs with people who are already at the company. So we'll have something like an internal job board that only employees can see, and you can apply to positions from the internal job board anywhere in the world. And you don't need to do something, you don't need to even let your manager know about it until the very end. You could say, hey, got a job at another office. I'm going to go there now. And that's it. And you can just move.
Without a 2 weeks notice, or like, or
Well,
just,
generally it's going to take anywhere from like 2 to 3 months, regardless for like visa and things like that. So you'll still be doing your job until the very end. But
So if it's in-house and they have, let's say, an person already employed at this company decides they want to go to this location, they just apply for it, and then the hiring manager from that side speaks with them, and then if they say yes, then they tell their current manager like, "Hey, I'm out of here in a month or 2 months or whatever."
yeah, well, there's interviews,
Right.
So
Okay.
there's a few interviews, and if you do those and you get on well with the hiring manager for that team, then that's pretty much it. You can just go.
Okay.
It's pretty smooth. Anyone can do it.
so go. I just want to say, like, just for people who want to get into the field and they just got out of school, like, how do they get an advantage to land a job in, like, these big companies? Like, they just like graduated. Just let's just say, just graduated from NYT, or like, or I'm just saying, like, from a school. They just graduated from a computer science, and like they did a couple of projects, but like no job experience. Just
Yeah. So we would consider that as like a university graduate hire.
okay.
And the thing is, we're trained really to not look at the school somebody comes from. We really look at what did they study in this case, or have they interned with us before, or where have they interned before. And if they're interning at like IBM or Facebook or something like that, we can say this person has a relatively high chance of performing well on our interviews. So a lot of these companies will have job descriptions open that are just titled, let's say, like sales university graduate or software engineer university graduate, and you can apply to that directly, and all those resumes will still be looked at. Those are some of the more popular positions that get the most resumes. But I know that the team that covers those always looks at every single one that comes through. And I could say to give yourself that edge, that advantage. If you have that intern experience, definitely make sure you elaborate on what you did. And if you know that it's something that whatever company you're applying to is working on, if that's relevant, let's say you like interned at NASA and then you want to go to like SpaceX, you'd want to elaborate more on your experience at NASA because that's going to be more relevant to the position.
Gotcha.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good example.
Evan, you have any different kind of questions, or
Yeah. I don't know if you can speak on this, but I was wondering, from what I've heard from people who are working as engineers in these big tech companies, why are engineering hubs sort of concentrated in certain locations? Or if there is a reason for that you can think of, then
I don't know, but I have a guess.
Okay, all right. What's your guess?
I think that it's just where if the company's making a lot of money there and they see that there's room for expansion in the market, they're gonna concentrate there. Or if it's generally you'll see a lot of like financial centers or financial hubs that will next become engineering centers.
Mhm.
I think that's because at a lot of the larger financial institutions, they have really skilled engineers or really skilled salespeople.
Right.
Um,
And they're all highly compensated. So
Exactly, yeah, and I think it just kind of follows that trend. But as for the real reason, I'm not sure.
all right. Well, I mean that makes just as much sense as anything I could come up with. I agree. What I mean, we've been talking all about applicants and how to get into the industry. And now I kind of want to talk about stuff that the recruiters have to deal with in their day to day. What sort of issues do you encounter when you're sending out scouting emails or trying to reach out to possibly successful applicants?
Yeah, especially when we reach out using LinkedIn. Some people will think that it's kind of like a scam. They won't really believe that they're being contacted by a recruiter from like a big tech company. So they'll just ignore it. And then we have to continuously follow up with them for months and months. Usually we'll go up to following up with them for about half a year, and then we'll eventually give up. But we'll send kind of like a monthly email to them or message to them on LinkedIn saying, hey, really interested in your background, checked out your profile. I saw you have this skill and your bio says you're interested in this. So we really tailor our messages to match them. And we see that leads to a pretty increased response rate too. But that's definitely one of like a really big issue. Another issue we'll get, and this is also kind of part of being a recruiter, is that a lot of people don't want to change jobs. A lot of people we're targeting are already at really big companies and they're getting paid very well. They really like what they're doing. So we need to convince them to apply. And you have to convince people by saying, and sometimes you have to be kind of pushy. Say, hey, what are you working on? Tell me like one thing that you don't like about your company, things like that. And then try to, hook them and pull them to your company to say, hey, we're working on this, and this matches exactly with what you studied, let's say, in like your PhD. Because, they're spending a lot of time on that, and it's clearly something that they really want to do. And if they're not doing it now, and we can pull them easier by using that. So we study their profiles a lot for the ones who aren't interested. And if we have any of their old resumes, we'll study their old resumes to see what they like, what their interests were, and what their background is, and really use that in our pitching call to them to eventually hook them to apply to us.
That's really interesting. It's kind of like appealing to their most core sense of self. It's like, what do they want to do? What do they want their legacy to be? So if you have something that matches that, it makes it way easier to convince them to reach out.
A lot goes into the kind of studying the profiles for sure.
All right. What are some reasons that you've gotten in the past for rejections to scout emails? And like you can go with obviously the best, like most reasonable ones, but I'd also really like to hear the ones that are kind of like, all right.
Yeah, I've had people. Some people are really nice. They'll be like, hey, thank you for reaching out to me. Like, I'm really happy. But right now it's just not the right time for me. And for those people, I'll just send kind of like a maybe like an email every couple months to be like, hey, even if now's not the right time, just don't have a chat, let me know. I can give you any kind of information that you need.
Yeah, because things change.
Yeah, exactly. And if we're already on good terms with them, then there's no point in just kind of throwing that relationship away. Another type we get is people who are angry because, again, a lot of these people from really big companies are getting like 40, 50 emails per day from recruiters from all over the world. So they just get kind of pissed off and they're like, no, like that will be a response. Just like, no. Like, okay. And usually like, I won't reply to them. I'll just, throw that kind of profile on the back burner. And
if the response message is just NO, I think I think there's not really much you can do to salvage.
Yeah. So I just kind of leave it. I'm like, all right, whatever. I think the most interesting one I've gotten is somebody mentioned that they were interested, and they said, I just like, I want to have a call with you first. And I was like, cool, let's do it. And they're like, no, it has to be a video call. And I was like, all right, fine. Can do video calls, it's no problem. So we hop on video and we start chatting, and then they mentioned that it just gets into this really, really weird chat about like some teacher in school that's like picking on their son. And I'm like, okay, I'm sorry that happened. Do you want to maybe apply for the role eventually? And they're like, well, I just need to figure out the school situation. And they went in like, after that, went into like a 15-minute explanation of what was happening again after they just explained it. And I was like, all right, look, if you're interested, just send me an email. And they just kind of were being like really weird. It looked like they were like, I don't want to say drugged up, but they didn't look like they were in the right state of mind. So it just kind of ended there. But that was one of the weirder ones that I've gotten for sure.
Yeah, that sounds like a really strange altercation for a recruiter, because it's like you obviously assume that the call is going to be about the position and what they want to do, but then they just start rambling about something
It just
else.
like took like a left, like a hard left of what
I'm
now?
assuming that didn't go any further.
No,
Okay.
it was just really awkward for like, because the calls generally we do are about like 15 to 20 minutes. This one was about 50 minutes.
Okay.
Wow.
And like you try to get out of the call, but you also try to be nice to the person too, because they might be really skilled and you might want them. And of course, like if someone tells you their son's getting bullied by a teacher, I'm not going to be like, oh, well, sucks for you, bye.
Right.
I'm going to be like, oh, well, sorry that happened. And it's just tough to get out of that kind of call sometimes.
Especially when you want to keep like a good relationship no matter what,
Yeah.
because you are actually putting like your face out there and you're representing the company as well.
In your time, you could have been on a call with another applicant.
I could have, yeah.
Would you say that these calls are they phone screenings, or are they just trying to understand the candidate and understanding where they're at in terms of their career?
I'd say half and half. So some of them will turn into a phone screen actually if we pitch to someone and they're really interested and they're like, all right, I want to apply now. And I'll kind of be like, well, we can start now if you're ready.
Right.
And then we'll kind of do a screen.
No
And
time
then the
like
other
today,
ones, yeah, right. And then the other ones will be like maybe someone applied online. We set up a call, and I'll just kind of screen them. Like I would already know they're interested because they applied online. So that will be kind of another type of call. But yeah, I'd say it's about half and half. But it depends on what role you're recruiting for. Some are like super niche roles where there's nobody who's really interested or very few people who have that background. So most of the calls in that case would be pitching for the role.
Is your job like, is it competitive? Like, do you have to be like trying to recruit more people than your coworker, or it's like more like you do your job, I do my job, and kind of like, I know I want to just get like away from like the pitching. It's just more like it feels like you have to constantly talk to these people and try and make them come to the company that you are at.
Right. So like, I kind of want to preface that with one example. Let's say you encounter an applicant who kind of fits your role, but is more suited to another role. Do you get like brownie points, or does your company recognize your efforts when you say, hey, Mr. Applicant, I have a colleague who maybe has a better role suited to your career and your path. Let me connect you with that person. Like, is there some sort of like
Point system
recognition? Yeah, partial recognition for that sort of work.
Yeah, I mean, there's a point system kind of, and definitely we do get brownie points for doing things like that. We do have something like, if you would think of a recruiting team, that team will ultimately have a goal that they have to meet. And it depends on the team as well. And honestly, I would even say it depends on the company. Some will say, this is a team goal, it's a team effort. And if we hit the goal as a team, it doesn't matter who's done what. Of course, those people will be getting promoted sooner, the ones that got more results.
Right.
But then other companies will be more individual focused and say, if you've been, we'll give you like an individual goal. Let's say like you have to hire like 20 people in a year or something, and that's just for you. And then it can differ really between teams and companies.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Like on that, I just have a question. Like how, like on a year, like what's the average that you hire someone like at the company that you are at? Personally, if you don't mind answering that question.
We don't know where George works, so I think it'd be all right. Like, but that's up to George.
I don't know really. I haven't been keeping count, to be honest. I kind of just keep going and just keep hiring people.
You just do your best.
Yeah, I just kind of give it my all. Yeah, actually, it's weird. I never thought about how many people I've hired. I don't know, maybe somewhere close
to. You could do ballpark too.
Yeah, in a year, maybe like 20 or 30, maybe. I don't know. It depends on the role I'm covering.
Well, it's the reason why I asked, like, because you are like affecting so many people's lives. Like like it's either is their first job or it's like their 5th or 10th job that you are helping them with throughout the process of getting a job and making a better for themselves in the future. So it was just more like I was just wondering if you like, I know you probably take pride in it. It's just more like fact, like if you have a number on it, because it's not like you're gonna know every single these people by a name basis. So
yeah, definitely, and I think that's also one of the reasons that I do continue in recruitment, because it's interesting. Somebody might be content at a smaller company making a smaller paycheck, and they never really think about applying to these really, really large companies. And then maybe I scouted them, and they end up getting a job with us at like their first job in like a big tech company, and that totally transformed somebody's life. And I don't know. I don't want to say I get like a sick thrill off of it. I think I kind of just enjoy that I can have like a pretty big impact on someone's life. So that's why I stick with what I do for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I've known you for quite some time now, and I know whenever we play RPG games, Angelo, he always plays healer.
Yeah.
So he's always the support role, trying to better the other people around him. So definitely has that quality in terms of a recruiting job.
Man.
So what are some strategies that you use to entice an applicant who's like still, maybe you've gone through 3 interviews with them and they're kind of on the fence about the position, and you honestly, earnestly believe, not just because you want to make the recruit the hire, but you honestly believe that they're great for the position and that they'll enjoy it. Yes. What are some strategies you use to kind of push them over the edge to get on board?
I think the last resort. I'll start from last resort.
Yeah, I'm sure that's what our listeners want to hear about.
Strategy we'll use is to talk about compensation.
Right.
Because it depends really. If they're already at like a really, really big company, then we won't do that. But if they're a super small company, we can say something like, you'll be able to work on something that you really, really enjoy while living, a lifestyle that not many people really get to experience, and you can be making money to live very, very comfortably, and we'll definitely be able to really take care of you in that sense. Other things I'll use would be something like benefits or insurance, and benefits for sure, actually, now that I think about it, especially when we talk to, let's say, someone who's thinking about having a family. And of course we never ask someone directly if they're planning to do that, because legally we can't. But if it just kind of came up in conversation and they said it, fun fact, legally we're not allowed to take a note about that as well.
You can't write it down?
No, you can't
write
it down.
But you can keep it in here.
You can remember it, yeah.
Okay.
So I'll remember something like that, and then I'll say like, hey, I remember you mentioned that you're thinking about having a family. We have a lot of like benefits including something where we allow you to work from home
Mm.
in like a situation where maybe like your kid is sick.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we do like paternal and maternal leave is quite long as well, where I'm at. So we'll use that as another pitching point to, say to someone who's thinking about having a family and say like, even if you just joined the company like yesterday, you can still use that benefit and take that leave.
Yeah.
So it makes, ultimately you're going to want people to feel comfortable and at ease. We're not trying to, drag you into something that you don't want to get into.
Mm-hmm.
It's to make you feel more comfortable, and we'll really use the information that you've given us already to say, okay, this is what you want, and here's what we can offer you, and then just try to, make it sound kind of sweet.
Yeah, thinking more long term, because if they're competitive and they go in with that feeling of like, I didn't really want to do this, and then they're still thinking about that, then the whole time they're there, they're not experiencing it with an open mind.
Yeah, and ultimately, the candidates, number one for us, if I have even like an inkling of feeling that the candidate is not going to enjoy it, or they're really not going to like it, I'll just tell them and be honest. I'm not going to try and just get a hire because it's going to make me look good. But yeah, it's really, we care a lot actually about the people that we talk to. We don't see it as just a resume. It's really seen as an actual person who's making a huge decision that's going to really, really impact their life. So definitely we give them a lot of time to think about it too.
All right.
Wow.
Yeah, I think benefits are huge, and just kind of an aside here, I read in the news recently that there's been lawsuits springing up about paternal and maternal leave in Japan, especially, and there was general manager of sales at, I think it was
Morgan Stanley.
Yeah, Morgan Stanley. Thank you, and someone else recently at ASICS.
Yeah.
Where Japan's paternal and maternal leave are generally pretty generous.
It's very long.
But only 5%, maybe even less, of people take it because company culture makes it very difficult to take it. I know the man who's working at ASICS said that once he came back from paternal leave, he was stuck with meaningless tasks and pretty much not allowed to work on anything of worth. So I think that's something that recruiters probably think about a lot in terms of HR and legal and all that stuff. So, sorry, Angelo, a little bit of an aside, but that's contemporary news for everybody.
Oh, that's fine. We'll throw a little slice of life for everyone to know.
Yeah. So actually getting into that, about whole balancing life and work, what is your take on the whole work-life balance movement that's been happening for the past, I'd say 3, maybe 4 years?
I love it because I'm not somebody who wants to spend my entire life in the office, even though, if you work in corporate, ultimately that's what you're going to do. But at least if you can make the most of it and get out as much as possible and things like that, that's really nice. And for a lot of these companies too, a lot of big tech companies, people will work from home. People will just go to like a cafe nearby their house and work from that cafe. And it's kind of nice. Like you can avoid that morning rush and that nasty Tokyo commute, especially. So for the work-life balance, I think that's really great. And that's something that actually I put a pretty heavy emphasis on. The freedom to really work from wherever and work whenever. In Japan, specifically, a lot of companies will say, like, you have to come in at this time, and then you can leave from this time. But usually when I pitch to people, I'll say, like, we don't do that. You can come in whenever you want to come in. You can leave whenever you want to leave, as long as by that deadline, you've done the work that needs to be done.
Right, so there isn't even core time, which I know is used in certain companies.
Legally, we have it, but no one, like, it's not enforced.
Right. Well, because as long as you're getting your work done, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
What do you mean by core time? Like 9 to 5, or like kind of like
11 to 4. So like you can kind of move your hours, but you have to be in the office or reachable to work at between those hours. Yeah, that's
gotcha.
Core time is. We kind of talked about this off the show. Racehorses, and you and I were talking about how big tech companies love to hire racehorses because they're totally happy working 80-hour weeks like Elon Musk. How do you feel about seeing applicants like that, or people who are around you and you see them in the office all the time?
Yeah, I am not a fan of those people. The company thrives because those people are there, honestly. They're getting a lot of the work done. They're getting promoted more quickly than most people. But the downside is that they kind of pump up goals for people who just want to have like a regular life or a regular work style. So let's say like in sales, like there might be someone who's like closing maybe like 10 deals per week, and the racehorse is closing like 20 deals per week because they're continuing to work after they go home. They're doing sales calls from home. They're doing sales calls while they commute. They're doing sales calls like before they brush their teeth, and
while they brush their teeth.
Yeah, right. and what that does is the manager doesn't know how long you've worked. They can't tell when you're working and when you're not working. What they see is the results. So if they see that there's a few racehorses on the team and they're closing 20 deals a week, and then when it comes time to set those next goals, they might set it at something like 15 as like that minimum goal. But that regular person who has the regular work style is going to be like, there's no way that I can hit that unless I start working overtime.
Right. Well, so that anomaly is like bringing up the bell curve.
Yes.
Yeah, they're skewing the bell curve.
Exactly.
They are the outliers.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, that's what the big tech companies thrive on, and
it is unfortunately
drive a lot of the innovation and the growth. So
yeah.
Let's just say these workhorses, like they hit the numbers consecutive, like every week or every month, and they want to make from league sale to manager. Like, how does one make that switch?
To become a manager?
Yeah.
Well, you would just apply for it, really. On like the internal job board, they would have a posting for manager, and you would apply for it. Nobody, like your manager, won't say, "Okay, well, now you're ready." It's kind of like you have to make that initiative to say, "I'm ready to become manager," and then you apply for it.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I'm sure whoever it is may not even say directly, "Hey, I want to be a manager." They may say like, "Hey, I want more responsibility."
Yeah.
Because I know I can handle it.
They might just want a pay raise and continue to do the same job. You can have like junior sales, regular sales, senior sales. You can have all these different kinds of sales. You can get super, super senior without even being a manager and make more money than a manager would. Mm-hmm. So it really depends on what career track that you want if you actually want to jump into that managerial space.
Gotcha.
So you would say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would you say that there's like technical mastery of sales, and then there's the sales department manager? So a manager obviously manages all the other salespeople, but then that technical master of sales is like the go-to guy for the clients that are necessary.
Yeah, exactly. And when we talk about sales, you're getting commission, right, from each deal that you close. If you're really, really good at sales and you're absolutely killing it, you're not just going to become a manager and lose that commission, because the manager doesn't get anything. They just get the base salary.
Right.
So people will just stay there and not become a manager, and then just become really, really good at what they do and make like 2 to 3 times as much as their manager makes. So yeah, there's definitely those two types of people that are kind of like technical mastery of sales, where they're the guru of everything and they're the go-to person. And there's a manager who just makes sure like everyone on the team is feeling okay, we're on track to get done what we need to.
Yeah, making sure all the deadlines are, at least people are moving towards them, and making sure there are no unpleasant surprises in terms of HR, right? If somebody says all of a sudden, "Hey, I'm quitting," it's like obviously the manager was not in touch with that employee.
Yeah,
So.
exactly.
All right. So in the recruiting process, kind of going back to the candidate side, when people apply online who think, oh yeah, I'm perfect for this role, my career looks, totally good for it, and they matched all the qualifications, but nobody responded to them. What might be some reasons for why they were kind of dropped out of the selection process?
Yeah. So just to give background information about this, there's some companies who send a rejection email, and there's some companies that send rejection emails. So I think that the ones that don't send rejection emails is kind of builds on that myth that no one ever reads the resumes, because they never get a response for it. But I think one of the bigger reasons that you might not get a response is that the role that you applied for might be too senior or too junior for you, and it wasn't the right fit at the right time. There might not be an opening spot for somebody with your skill level at that time, but if we know you're good, we'll keep you with it. And we'll make a reminder, put like your online profile into some like spreadsheet.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll say, when this role opens up, I'm going to come back to this person and actively reach out to them.
Right.
So we know that you're there. It just might not be the right time.
Okay. So like maybe somebody even tries to apply for an older position that just got filled, and none of the people who you work with on the recruiting side have any openings for that position anymore.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. Are there times where internally, there's an employee who is a technical master, maybe they're in a software development role, and they want to be a manager or maybe work something more client-facing? I'm sure it's pretty rare, but do you have those situations? And if so, what's the process like for them?
Yeah, that's pretty rare.
Yeah, I bet.
I mean, yeah.
But well, I would say that probably technical master to manager is rare, but even more rare would be technical person to, person-to-person communication.
Customer-facing.
Right.
Yeah. I for those kinds of processes, so like if someone wants to become a manager, they can, like I said, just apply for it. You can, or if you talk to your manager and say, hey, like, I want to be a manager too, and they know somebody somewhere else that is looking for a manager, they can help you with that.
So when you say someone else, it's someone who's even more senior than a manager who needs a manager?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because sometimes there could be like, let's say like you have an engineering team, right? And then you have an engineering manager who's at the top of the team, and you might have like a couple like team leads who are kind of sub-managing a couple of different projects the team's doing.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be another, managerial position, or it could be like a stepping stone to becoming a manager, right? So those kinds of opportunities are available. And I think if someone wants to, let's say they're doing some software development, but they want to be more customer facing, it depends if let's say that it's in Japan, right? But they're not like a native Japanese speaker, probably not going to happen. But if let's say that they're a native Japanese speaker and they're in Japan and they want to do that, I'd say they would have maybe a couple of interviews that focus on communication skills. And then, and only then, if that was okay, they could probably make that transfer because they want to test their technical skills.
Right.
Because they would already.
Yeah, they're not going to test the technical skills. They're already an engineer working at the company. So,
yeah.
Yeah. All right. On the recruitment side, who do you keep in touch with? What parties are you working with to find out who you're supposed to hire? What kind of applicants you're looking for?
Yeah, I think every recruiter has a different approach to that. And personally, what I do is I will speak directly with engineering managers. Just say, hey, I know you have some openings. who do you want? And then in order to understand the profile, I'll search for maybe like 20 people. And then I'll bring those 20 profiles to that manager and say, hey, of these ones, what's the best match for you? And they'll pick out like 5. And then I'll do a deep search and match for something that's related to those 5 profiles that they've picked out. And then I'm just like very, very like forward facing in that sense. I'll just take something, latch onto it, and only hire for that until it's filled. Whereas other people just kind of like jump around to different positions and try to like cover multiple things at once.
Right. Well, I think that's a difficult thing too, because applicants may be open to exploring new positions in another company at different times.
Yeah.
So I understand the rationale behind your coworkers who are looking at everything at the same time, but also, you aren't able to focus more on this subset that you've been given.
Yeah.
And find the correct applicant.
I feel it helps to build a relationship with the engineering manager or any kind of manager in that sense too. Like, you're coming to them and saying, I'm going to fill whatever you have. Mm-hmm. And then they know next time something opens up, you're going to be the first person that they go to.
Right. Okay. So you get more opportunities to bring in another person to their department. Okay. Right. Huh. Interesting. Kind of like a little bit of sales as a recruiter, like
a little bit
building up your own image as a recruiter who brings in successful applicants.
Yeah, a little bit.
Basically pitching like the idea of this company that George is working for, that try and pitch to these applicants or referrals or like people that meet on LinkedIn, trying to get them in to come. So those make sense about being like a salesperson or person to person. Kind of like, I don't know, like more into sales in that sense.
It's more about it's a lot about the personal relationship, because if the hiring manager trusts you to bring them people who make sense for the position rather than some random person who
bozo
to really match the candidate, or bozo. like the story we heard earlier. Like the story we heard earlier. Not only do you deal with scouted people, but I know you talked about kind of in-house referrals. Are there situations where you prefer a referral over scouted people, or vice versa?
Yeah, referrals are really, really good. Especially because we know that, let's say, if someone's referring for the job that they're doing, we're usually really confident in that referral because they already know the job. They're doing the job. And if they believe that someone else can do that job, and they're referring them, we're pretty confident in that. So, and those times referrals are really, really nice. We really like those. Other times, let's say, in my case, I've referred before. So in my case, I referred somebody for I believe it was like a legal position. I don't do legal at all. So my referral basically holds no weight. and ultimately that was a rejected referral. But if you're referring for what you're doing, that referral holds 10 times more weight for sure. But we still look at all of them, no doubt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, even if it's a referral for something that's out of your area of expertise, it could probably just be treated as a scout, or as a possible candidate, just like all the other candidates.
And some people will know that the person they want to refer is not looking to change companies, but they'll tell us about that person and say, hey, you should convince this person to join us. And then we'll go out and try to do that.
Right.
I don't know.
All right. Well, I think we're about done with all the questions. Angela, you got anything else?
No, thank you. No, thank you for coming on the show, George.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being a guest. If you have anything else that you want to say as a recruiter for these big tech companies, either to recruiters working now or candidates, here's your.
Yeah, I have one thing that I really, really want to say.
Okay, go ahead.
So you can apply to these companies as many times as you want. And even if you have applied and you've gone through like the process even a little bit, like you failed, it doesn't mean that you can never apply there or interview there ever again. So if you think like you might have just like a slight chance, or if you're just interested, you should apply, because there's a chance that somebody might end up getting back to you, whether that's about the role you applied for or a role they feel is even a better fit. Somebody's going to look at your application, and it might end up changing your life. So you should 100% apply all the time.
Believe in yourself. That's the message.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That's good. Beautifully said. Thanks again, George, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And everybody, I hope this was an informational and educational podcast for you all. And, maybe we might revisit the subject in the future. So stay tuned.
Thank you, guys. Stay tuned for next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.